The Jets play Philadelphia on Sunday. What do they need to do to pull the upset? We'll discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Jets fans and Eagles fans. I'm John Butchko, the host of Locked On Jets, along with Louis DiBiase, co-host of Locked On Eagles, getting you ready for Week 6 action. The Philadelphia Eagles at the New York Jets Sunday at MetLife Stadium. And you should know that this crossover Thursday is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, Louis, great to speak with you. Again, I know we did this a couple of years ago. I think that was the Jets and the Eagles that were playing the 17th game back in 2021.
Yep.
Lots happened between now and then. Give me the biggest storyline for the Philadelphia Eagles heading into this matchup.
Yeah, I think for them, and it's crazy, John, also good to be with you. Long time no talk for sure. And these teams are very different. Honestly, in 2021, I was actually buying into what New York was building more than Philadelphia because I didn't think Jalen Hurts was going to be the answer. And unfortunately, it doesn't look great now, but I was a big fan of Zach Wilson coming out of BYU, and I wanted the Eagles to trade up for him until we realized they didn't have a chance because the Jets were going to take him at number 2 overall. But fast forward a few years later, the Eagles are at the top of the league at 5-0 right now, one of 2 undefeated teams. And the big storyline is, can they continue to look more and more like their 2022 form? Although they're one of 2 undefeated teams left in the league, they really haven't. Last week, I felt like it was finally the first game they put together a complete performance where no unit was struggling. There's been times this year the secondary hasn't been good. The first few weeks, the passing attack didn't look great. Then there were times the pass rush wasn't getting there. They only won by 9 against the Rams last week, but it was a complete performance. Now can they do that and have it reflect on the scoreboard by getting this red zone offense going? To me, that's the big storyline. They should be favorites in this one. They've never lost to the Jets before, but at the same time, they have a really good test against a very good Jets defense.
That's the storyline that comes up every time these teams play, is that the New York Jets have never beaten the Philadelphia Eagles in a regular season. Of course, they've played so many years in that last preseason game, like the worst preseason game where all the backups play.
Every year, man, growing up, it's always been Eagles, Jets. And there's been some wild quarterbacks that have played in those games. And weirdly enough, John, I feel like in all the regular season games, too, I can't remember the last time the Eagles actually played a Jets starter. I mean, they did play Zach Wilson, but it always felt like, I don't know, the scripts were always, even 2021, it was Gardner Minshew for the Eagles. So the games have always been strange.
I remember, actually, I've been watching the Jets since 1993, so 30 years. Yeah. I remember the first game, the first time I've ever watched these two teams play, it was in the old stadium in the Meadowlands. We won't say the name, but the Jets jumped out to a 21-0 lead in that game, and they blew it. And I think the next week the Jets went out and blew a 17-0 lead to the Raiders. So I started this with watching, first of all, the Jets lose, but second of all, watching it's just unusual games between these teams. But I hear what you're saying, and I envy you, Louis. I envy you and your Eagles fans because, I wish for the Jets, as a team that has not made the playoffs since 2010, I wish that the biggest concern we had was our undefeated team not putting it all together. I say that somewhat jokingly.
I know it does sound like first world problems, right, when I say that?
Absolutely. And, on the Jets side, I think the biggest storyline, there are a couple of storylines, but I think they all tie into like one key point is, this is kind of a new look offense for this team. And I think it's changed dramatically in the last couple of days since the Jets win in Denver, because it was the first game where Breece Hall was not on a pitch count. And he was a phenomenal back last year. He suffered an injury. Actually, ironically, in the game the Jets played at Denver, which was their opponent last week, suffered a knee injury. And Garrett Wilson was the offensive rookie of the year last year for the Jets. He's an excellent receiver, had 1,100 yards a year ago, on pace for just about 1,000 yards again this year, despite all the Jets' offensive problems. But I got to tell you, Louis, I thought Breece Hall was on his way to winning Rookie of the Year if he hadn't gone down last year around the midway point of the season, right around this time of year. And last week, they brought him back slowly. I thought it was smart. I mean, I think there were games where maybe they could have gone to him a little bit more. I mean, there was a game in Dallas week 2 where he only got 4 carries, which I don't think that's pitch count. I think that's the Jets not giving him the ball enough. And a couple of weeks ago, he only had 6 carries in the game where the offense did play pretty well against Kansas City. But they kind of, they took the pitch count off last week. They fed him the ball. And he responded with 177 yards on the ground. there aren't many backs that make a big difference in this league. I don't think. I think most of the time the run game is based on the offensive line. I think Breece Hall is one of the few backs that make a difference. But
I agree.
after that, Jets are also dealing with a kind of a reshuffled offensive line. It's the second time this year they have to reshuffle their offensive line due to an injury tackle. A few weeks back, Dwayne Brown got injured, and the Jets actually reshuffled their offensive line in a way that, in my opinion, made it better. They moved Elijah Vera Tucker from guard to tackle. They moved Mekhi Becton from right tackle to left tackle, and they put in the rookie Joe Tippmann at right guard. Unfortunately, Vera Tucker, who also was injured, just like Breece Hall was injured in the game in Denver last year, Vera Tucker was also suffered a season-ending injury, and in a cruel twist of fate, suffers another season-ending injury this year when the Jets play in Denver. So it's probably going to be second-year guy Max Mitchell. He's kind of a wild card. He played a lot last year because of injury. He was very up and down. I think more down than up.
Yeah.
And this is not the defensive line you want to break
I was going to say, man,
line against.
No, and they're heating up. I mean, Jalen Carter looks like the defensive rookie of the year by a landslide right now. Jordan Davis looks great in his second year. Fletcher Cox should be back this week. He was out with a back injury yesterday, or I should say on Sunday. At the same time, Fletcher's been having a career rejuvenation. Not that he's been bad over the last few years, but Fletcher Cox looks like his old elite self through the first month of the season. Got Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, Brandon Graham on the edge. Yeah, this is definitely not the defensive line to deal with injuries for the Jets. I think that unit totally took over against the Rams in that second half because, John, if you look at the first half, Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, they were totally shredding that secondary. They made adjustments, but the main reason that game the defense was able to buckle down was because of this pass rush. So that's definitely going to be a key, and especially for Zach Wilson, who holds onto the football pretty long, right? I mean, I think it's over 3 seconds per drop back, which is not ideal against this front.
Yeah, it's really funny because if you look at like the splits he has, if he is getting the ball out in under 2.5 seconds, he's right up there with anybody statistically this year. And
sure.
I will say this. I mean, Zach Wilson, it's been very up and down this year. There's clearly improvement. Now, improvement is a relative term. I mean, we're going from last year where, he didn't look
That's
like
fair.
Function at points, but
he hasn't better the last 2 weeks, right, though, John? I would say the last two games are maybe the two best he's had.
I think he played really well against Kansas City.
Yeah.
Initially I left the Denver game thinking he played pretty well. Then I watched the film and I thought there were some reads that he missed. And in fact, there was ironically, there's a play where he hits Tyler Conklin, clutch play in the fourth quarter where he hits Tyler Conklin for a 37-yard gain on a key third down. And then I watched it over and I saw it's kind of like one of those weird things where you're happy and a little, unhappy because he kind of missed Conklin was the second read. He kind of missed his first read, and it ended up working out because he ended up with 37 yards instead of like a more moderate game. But I actually think he kind of left some throws on the field. So it was very up and down against Denver. He's a better quarterback, but as I was saying, he's really his numbers are really good if he gets the ball out in under 2.5 seconds. And they're really bad if he holds the ball for longer. And I think that's just a case where sometimes he's very decisive, and when he's decisive with the football, good things happen. And when he's not decisive, bad things happen. And once you force him to get into the third read, that's where he kind of struggled. I think he can get the first read. I think he can get the second read, but that third read is sometimes an issue with him. And again, it's a tough Eagles defense to play. And one point I just want to make here is this a random point, but I love what the Eagles have done drafting the last couple of years on defense because, it's the most logical thing in the world. They just that Georgia defense a couple of years ago was one of the greatest defenses in college.
No, I'm with you.
Let's just recreate the best college defense in years, right?
And funny enough, John, I think Howie Roseman used to overcomplicate things. He never used to take players from Alabama, from Georgia, from top schools. You even look back to the 2020 NFL draft where, Justin Jefferson seems like the obvious best prospect at receiver when they're on the board, and he takes TCU receiver Jalen Reagor, and we know how that works. And the last few years, it's definitely keep it simple, stupid, and it's totally panned out. That's why they're getting Jordan Davis's and Devontae Smith's, Landon Dickerson's, Jalen Carter's, and it's totally panning out for this team. But it wasn't that long ago that Howie was not great at drafting. And if you go back to the 2021 draft, man, they actually got very lucky at quarterback. Of course, they believed in Jalen Hurts more than most teams, but the rumor was, and I remember Ian Rappaport tweeting this during the combine, the Eagles, before they traded back during that draft, they first looked into moving up to that third pick, which eventually San Fran did to take Trey Lance, but they only wanted Zach Wilson once they learned their old buddy Joe Douglas was going to take him. they move down. So there is some alternate reality out there where Zach Wilson might end up being a Philadelphia Eagle. And so that's why it's such a crazy situation seeing what's going on with the Jets at quarterback right now. But I can't help but relate because over the years, it felt like they wanted Wilson. It felt like they wanted to trade for a veteran quarterback like an Aaron Rodgers or a Russell Wilson. And I don't want to say they lucked into how good they are right now, but that definitely plays a part in the NFL, and it totally helped them at the most important position.
I say it all the time. Your GM, it's part skill, it's part luck. I mean, I
Oh,
think
you
there's more
have to
luck
have
that goes
luck,
into it
man.
than people want to admit.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think who knows what happens if Zach Wilson's in Philly, but they're definitely not on the path they are right now with Jalen Hurts. So I definitely feel lucky in that way.
All right, well, this is a key matchup for both teams have a lot at stake in this game. Jets trying to avoid a 2-4 start. Eagles trying to keep their undefeated season going, stay on top of the NFC. As we continue this crossover edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Eagles, we're going to get to some key matchups that could help decide this game. That's ahead on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Eagles. And our episode today is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharps, you pick more or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. If you're an Eagles fan, you might want to take Jalen Hurts to throw for more than 2 touchdowns. If you're a Jets fan, maybe you want to take Quinnen Williams for more than 2 sacks. Well, you can do that at PrizePicks. And with the PrizePicks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if your player gets injured. For NFL games and college football top 25 matchups, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, it's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Code LockedOnNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, for a first deposit match of up to $100 using PrizePicks.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles and Locked On Jets your first listen each and every day. It's a crossover Thursday edition of the show. Louis DiBiase alongside John Butchko. Eagles Jets this Sunday. It's going to be an interesting game. The Eagles favorites right now, 5-0, trying to get to 6-0 on the year. The Jets 2-3. Still fighting. The season is alive, trying to get back to 500 at 3-3. Guys, football season, by the way, it's here. Locked On, we're kicking up our coverage with Locked On NFL Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On's going to go live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on every Locked On NFL YouTube channel, including Locked On Eagles and Locked On Jets. Host Tanitra Batiste, Jarvis Davis, and Kyle Krabs. They'll break down every game on the NFL slate, get you ready for your team's matchups, your fantasy lineups, betting angles, all that and more. Find Locked On NFL Kickoff every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel. All right, John, let's get into some matchups here, some key matchups for this game. And I think the one you actually mentioned could really dictate this for many reasons. It's the Jets offensive line against the Eagles defensive line, because the Jets are dealing with some injuries up front. The Eagles defensive line might be the deepest in football. Zach Wilson holds on to the football for a pretty long time, right over 3 seconds per dropback, it seems like this season. That to me is the key, because if he's not getting the ball out quick, this pass rush for the Birds is going to take over. That was kind of the recipe for success in 2021. But as you mentioned, Zach Wilson, when he gets the ball out quicker, he is a much better player. And that's how offenses have had success against the Eagles this year, against that secondary, is when they get that first read. The Eagles need to get offenses off that first look, and they struggled too early on. It's been better the last few weeks, but I think that's the key matchup.
That's exactly what I was going to go with, Louis. I think you hit the nail on the head. And this is the type of matchup where I look at it, it could potentially wreck the game for the Jets. I mean, there are lots of matchups up front that I don't love. And I would start with these Eagles edge rushers against Max Mitchell, the second-year right tackle, who he stepped in for Elijah Vera Tucker in Denver. There were some good moments, there were some bad moments, but I think about him matching up against Hassan Reddick, maybe matching up against Josh Sweat. I think that could be a problem for the Jets. I mean, even on the other side, you have Mekhi Becton, a fourth-year guy who's really playing for the first time since his rookie season. He missed his full second season and third season, essentially. Played one game year 2, suffered a season-ending injury in training camp in year 3. I think Reddick could be a tough matchup for him. He's stylistically, he's the type of pass rusher who gives them issues. Yeah. And then, as you mentioned, I mean, Jalen Carter is having a phenomenal rookie year against Laken Tomlinson, who has been a free agent disappointment. He's been up and down. I mean, he's had some decent games for the Jets, but not really what they were hoping for. And you mentioned it. I mean, I will say that Zach Wilson's better under pressure than he was a year ago. I mean, I'll tell you, Louis, a year ago when I was watching Zach Wilson, the first sign of pressure, he had the spin move. Like it was, you always knew you were in trouble when you saw the Zach Wilson spin. And he was going to bail on the pocket. He's standing stronger in the top pocket. He's not as afraid to take hits, so that's a positive. But man, I look at this matchup and I see that this is the type of matchup we could be looking at the Eagles win Sunday, and I'll say that's the number one reason why.
I agree. And I think, as you mentioned in segment one, Breece Hall definitely has his legs underneath him right now. He looked great against Denver. Should have been the rookie of the year last year before he got injured. The problem is they have a tough matchup against this Eagles front, which is number one right now in the lowest amount of rushing yards per game. And that's been anchored by Jordan Davis in his second year at nose tackle. He has been unbelievable. And Jalen Carter's getting all this hype, as he should, for his pass rush numbers. Number one in pressures among all defensive tackles, even over Aaron Donald. 3.5 sacks so far this year, 2 forced fumbles. But he's been equally as good against the run, as have Fletcher Cox, Milton Williams. It's a really good front against the run. So you don't want Zach Wilson, I feel like, to have to win you this game. It's going to have to be on Breece Hall, but he has a tough matchup for sure, John.
Okay, I'm going to go to the other side of the ball for my matchup, and it's going to be a little bit of a unique matchup. It's going to be Jalen Hurts versus the Jets defense, but especially Jalen Hurts scrambling, because last couple of weeks, the Jets have had issues with Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson running the ball. And, there are multiple reasons for it. Sometimes, they were just in man coverage and a lane opened up and, the receivers ran everybody off. But Jets have had issues against scrambling quarterbacks. They did a better job in the second half against Wilson. I know Jets fans, whenever a quarterback scrambles well, the answer everybody always says, "Oh, just put a spy on him. Just put a spy on him." Well, you can't really put a spy on somebody all game. I think part of it, you have to read your keys. I think pass rushers need to be disciplined. But Jalen Hurts, I mean, he could beat them through the air. In fact, if I was going with another matchup, I may go for this matchup with the Eagles receivers against the Jets corners, because Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed against AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, that's going to be a tremendous matchup, and that could also decide the game. But I think more than anything, and it's really based on what I've seen the last 2 weeks, because Mahomes and Russell Wilson hurt the Jets with their legs. Jets cannot let Jalen Hurts break off like 20, 30-yard scrambles when the passing game breaks down.
Well, and John, I will say too, Jalen Hurts been a little more hesitant through the first 5 weeks to run and take on contact last year. I mean, this is a power running quarterback that plays like a power running back. Might be the strongest quarterback in the league right now, but was sliding a lot more. It felt like he was trying to stay in the pocket the first 4 games. He definitely let loose a little more though against the Rams, and he made them pay in that way on third down. The Eagles were 13 of 18 last week on third down. He converted 6 of those with 5 with his arm. Or 4 of them, and then 6 with his legs. And he was running a whole lot more. So, yeah, that's definitely a key. I will say, too, they finally got Dallas Goedert involved more at tight end, and he was not involved for the first month. So that's going to be a key, too, because it is strength against strength, I feel like, with the Eagles receivers against the Jets corners. So maybe they try to get Dallas Goedert even more involved over the middle. I think that's definitely going to be a key, too, is keep your tight end one happy.
And that's going to be interesting, because the Jets this year are experienced their breakout with Quincy Williams, the linebacker. Now, CJ Mosley's the bigger name because obviously he went to all those Pro Bowls in Baltimore. Quincy Williams was a guy the Jets claimed off waivers 2 years ago from Jacksonville, and he has blossomed this year. He was a starter for the last couple of years. Actually, Quinnen Williams' older brother. So the Jets actually have two brothers playing on their defense. Quincy Williams, a lot of speed. The last 2 years, he's been very inconsistent. He's been a guy who is just as likely to make the big tackle for a loss for 2-yard loss as he is to fill the wrong gap and allow a 20-yard gain. This year he's been different. A lot of speed. He's been really good in coverage. I think Quincy Williams versus Dallas. I mean, you look at these matchups. Eagles have a tremendous amount of talent on their offense. Jets have a really talented defense. I mean, when the Eagles have the ball, this is going to be really fun to watch.
I agree. This is the strength-on-strength unit versus unit matchup in this game that's going to be the most fun to watch. And that's the thing I would say, like, John, you were talking about how Mahomes hurt him with his legs, but when you look at his passing numbers and when you look at Josh Allen week 1, the Jets have held 2 of the best quarterbacks in the league so far this year to their worst games. So the Eagles definitely have their work cut out for them. If they were to lose this game, I would say it's because the Jets defense took over.
Yeah, I think it's very likely the Jets right now with, if Aaron Rodgers was here, first time we're mentioning Aaron Rodgers, how about that? We've gotten this far.
Right.
Aaron Rodgers on the team, it's a different story. But
I was going to say, John, this was a game I circled. It was like, this is going to be one of those tough matchups they don't play many star quarterbacks in the first half of the season. Here is one of them. And That's not the case.
It's one of those funny things because the Jets have getting a lot of Jim Nantz and Tony Romo. They've had a couple primetime games, and it was all based on Aaron Rodgers was going to be here. And I think this is America's game of the week on Fox. Again, I think that was
Yeah.
a decision made before the season because they thought Aaron Rodgers was going to be here. If Aaron Rodgers was the Jets quarterback, I think they'd have a little bit more balance. This is a defensive-oriented team. This is when the Jets win games, it's because the defense wins it for them.
No, I completely agree. So, John, let's get into some predictions coming up next. This is Crossover Thursday, Locked On Eagles and Locked On Jets. And today's show is sponsored by Jase Medical. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you peace of mind so that you're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using our code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON in all caps at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com again to get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics.
It's Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm John Butchko, Locked On Jets, along with Louis DiBiase, Locked On Eagles. Jets and Eagles, Week 6 action. MetLife Stadium, a stadium the Eagles are well familiar with because they play there every year against the Giants. Louis, how do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is going to be, I'm not saying the Eagles are going to blow the Jets out. I respect their defense too much. I think the way New York would have to win this game, they need to force turnovers on the defensive side of the ball. Jalen Hurts surprisingly actually throwing more interceptions through the first 5 weeks. He's almost eclipsing already his interception total from the entire 2022 season. So the Jets are going to win this game. They're going to have to win because of their defense and win with their offense. But I still think the Eagles are just too talented on both sides of the ball. I think that matchup with their defensive line against the Jets front, or I should say offensive line and Zach Wilson, is just too overpowered for the Birds' favor, where I'll say they win this game. Do they score 30 plus? I'm not willing to go that far. I'll say it's like, I don't know, I'll say 27-14, the Eagles win. I think that's a pretty solid victory. They get to 6-0 and continue to rack up these wins. But I think the Jets defense is good enough to keep it close for a while.
Yeah, and when I think about how I predict these games, I try and think through if these teams played 10 times, who would win more?
Right,
because,
sure.
like anything could happen in a one-game scenario, so I certainly think the Jets can win. This year I'm on a little bit of a roll. I'm 4-1 predicting Jets games. So a couple of years ago it was ridiculous. Like I think I lost like my first 7 games. Like every time I picked the Jets to lose, they'd win. Every time I picked them to win, they'd lose. This year I feel like I have a better handle on this Jets team. One thing that's been clear about the Jets is so far, outside of Week 2 in Dallas, they have played to the level of their competition. Week 1 against Buffalo, they played a really good game. Week 2 is the exception. Week 3 against a New England team that's awful. Jets played even worse than New England and handed the Patriots their only win. Week 4 against Kansas City, they lost and they played a miserable first quarter, but the last 3 quarters, especially quarters 2 and 3, they were excellent. They played some of their best football. Last week against Denver, they kind of skated to a win. They didn't play that well. I would be surprised if the Jets did not play well this weekend because this, again, is a team that's essentially they played to the level of their competition. I think that if you play this out 10 times, the Eagles are going to win more. I mean, that's just the way it is. There's a path to victory for the Jets. It's a lot of Zach Wilson, getting the ball out quickly. I think when they're trying to push the ball down the field, they need to get to play action more. Nathaniel Hackett has not done a good job setting the Jets up enough on play action. Zach Wilson did very effective on play action this year, and I think it's logical because he's a young quarterback who is very inconsistent with his reads. So when you run play action, you kind of simplify the reads and you manipulate defenders. I think they need to get to more of that in this game. I think the Jets defense will do a good job. If not, they won't stop the Eagles, but they'll slow the Eagles down a bit. I think you said it right. It's going to take turnovers for the Jets. I think it's going to be maybe Breece Hall. It's going to take Breece Hall maybe running for another 170. Yeah, putting up a big game. But I think the Eagles just have more firepower on the offensive side of the ball. I love both teams' defenses. I think if you look defense versus defense, these teams are right with each other. Which team has more firepower on offense? That's clearly the Eagles. They have the two receivers.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, I agree. It's like, two good defenses. If you had to bet on one offense to make more plays, I think it's definitely the Birds.
The one potential X factor in this game is Jets special teams has been phenomenal this year. I mean, I've seen a couple ratings there. Their number one special teams unit in the league, Greg Zuerlein, having a great season. The punter, Thomas Morstead, really doing well. The coverage units are doing a solid job. They even won a game on a punt return in overtime by Xavier Gibson, although he put the ball on the ground twice last week. So that's the one blemish for special teams. So I think the Jets may need a big special teams play to pull it off. I think it's one of those situations. If both teams play their A game, the Eagles are going to win. So the Jets need the Eagles to not play their A game. The Jets need to play their A game. If they do that, the Jets can win. But I think, if it's a neutral setting, if both teams play like their B game, I'd expect the Eagles to come out on top.
And like you said, if Aaron Rodgers is playing this game, we're having a different discussion. But I think that's the other thing is the quarterback matchup. Jalen Hurts severely outguns right now Zach Wilson. But Garrett Wilson is one of the better receivers, younger receivers in football, and he's a guy we didn't even mention. This Eagles secondary hasn't been great so far this year, despite having Darius Slay and James Bradbury. Maybe they move Wilson in the slot more where teams are cooking this defense. Do the Eagles have Darius Slay shadow Wilson, since he really is that one legitimate target that they do have? Might be something to look into. If not, Bradley Roby's been the guy playing in the slot over the last week since they signed him. Avonte Maddox, their main slot corner, is out for the year with a torn pec, or torn bicep, I should say. So we'll see what happens with that Garrett Wilson matchup. That's the other thing I'm looking at, John. But I think this should be a good game Sunday. Again, I'll predict an Eagles win, but I don't think it's going to be a blowout.
Yeah, I'm going with the Eagles win also. I think it's going to be a tight game. And I mean, part of this is last week the Jets needed to beat Denver because if they lost to Denver, they were staring 1-5 right in the face. Right. They're heading into their bye. Look, you don't want to be 2-4. 2-4 makes it really tough, but the schedule does open up. They have their bye. They'll have a game against the Giants, who don't look that great right after the bye. So I don't know that there's the air of desperation that there was last week for the Jets. I think what you're hoping for the Jets is maybe the Eagles are looking past them, which I'm not sure they're going to do. I mean, I think that's always the X factor. I mean, look, I've watched a lot of bad Jets football through the years, and I've seen them win games because the other team, didn't take the game seriously enough. But I don't expect that to happen with this Eagles team.
Yeah, this Eagles team really isn't wired that way. I mean, Jalen Hurts and just the way they prepare, they're kind of psychopaths that always, it feels like they're never satisfied with wins. So that's one very good trait about this Eagles team, even their young players, is, I feel like they do truly preach or follow what their head coach preaches, which is one day, one practice, one game at a time. As cheesy as it sounds, I think they really do live by that. And I think they have to, considering the Super Bowl loss they had last year. They can't afford to look all the way, too deep into the season. And sometimes good teams can, as you mentioned, fall to that fate. But I think the Eagles have done a really good job of not doing that, as many Super Bowl losers do. And that's part of why they're 5-0.
All right, well, Louis, I hope the Jets win Sunday, but I'll wish you luck the rest of the year. I'm sure you'll do the same, man, because
sure.
Jets have NFC East action ahead of them.
That's right. We're going to need your help a little bit more than that Dallas game.
Eagles are facing the AFC East, so we're going to be rooting for each other's teams plenty this year.
Absolutely, John. It was great to talk to you, man.
Anyway, take care, everybody. Have a great Thursday. Eagles fans, tune into Locked On Eagles tomorrow. Louis will preview this game. I'll do the same on Locked On Jets. And Jet fans, head on over to Locked On Eagles to hear a great perspective from the other side. Until then, have a great Thursday. We'll